What if I told you that some truths don't reveal themselves until you're ready to receive them? That there are moments, quiet, invisible moments when reality shifts, not because the world changes, but because you do. And suddenly a piece of information appears, a conversation, a forgotten page, a voice from the past. And it doesn't just reach you, it recognizes you, as if it had been waiting. That's where you are right now. Not by coincidence, not by accident, but because something in you has awakened just enough to feel the pull of a forgotten moment in history. A moment buried in dust, veiled in secrecy, and nearly lost in the noise of a world too loud to hear it. A moment that has lived in the shadows for almost 100 years, protected by silence until the exact second when someone like you would finally be able to understand it. This is not a story. This is not a theory. What you're about to hear is not a creation, it's a revelation. One that came through the mind of a man who walked the line between science and the divine. A man whose name became myth, not because of what he accomplished, but because of what he discovered, and what they made sure you'd never see. Nikola Tesla was not simply an inventor. He was a transmitter, a vessel, a frequency in human form. He tapped into a knowing so vast, so precise, that the world around him didn't have the tools or the will to comprehend it. And so it buried him, first with indifference, then with silence, and finally with denial. But the silence was never empty. Some truths aren't buried. They're planted, hidden with intention, left like seeds under the soil of time, waiting for the right consciousness to bloom. And now you've found one. Because the interview you're about to hear, these words, these insights, were never meant for the world he lived in. They were meant for this world, your world, a world trembling on the edge of spiritual awakening, searching for something real beneath the illusion. And that's why this resurfaced now. That's why you're hearing it now. Not a second too soon, not a breath too early. Tesla once said that the universe speaks in patterns, that everything, light, sound, thought, is vibration, and that all vibration follows intelligence. Which means the moment you came across this was not random. You were vibrating at just the right frequency to make this connection. You tuned in, whether you realized it or not. Because that's how divine knowledge works. It doesn't arrive, it reveals itself. You weren't meant to find this when you were still asleep. You were meant to find this now, after everything you've been through. After the heartbreaks, the confusion, the nights you questioned your purpose, your path, your very existence. After the quiet nudges and strange synchronicities, after all the little signs that made you feel like something was trying to reach you, even if you didn't have the words for it yet. Now you do. Now you're ready. The truth is, you've always felt there was more. You've always sensed that this world isn't as it seems, that the story we've been given from school, from media, from institutions that pretend to know what's best for us is incomplete. You felt the hollowness in the scripted version of life. Wake up, work, consume, die. You knew there was a missing piece. What you didn't know was that someone found it. Someone who saw beyond the veil. Someone who understood that the mind is a mirror, and that the universe doesn't just exist. It thinks. It remembers. It creates. And that someone was Tesla. But Tesla's real discoveries were never about electricity, not truly. That's just what they let you believe. His real work, the knowledge that terrified governments and silenced publications, wasn't about current. It was about consciousness. It wasn't about machines. It was about the source, the structure of life itself. And that's what they buried. Because power is easy to manage when people believe they're powerless. Control is effortless when the masses forget they are more than flesh and blood. The last thing they want is for you to remember that you were designed, not by evolution, not by randomness, but by a force so intelligent, so divine, that even the most advanced minds of today still stumble in its shadow. Tesla remembered. That's why they erased him. But here's what they didn't account for. You, the one who would remember. The one who would hear these words not as theory but as truth, because deep down you've always known it, not logically but spiritually, like an ancient whisper in your blood, a distant memory your soul never forgot. You are not here by chance. You are not watching this by luck. You are here because the silence that once protected this truth is over. You are here because the storm is about to begin. The storm of remembrance, the storm of awakening, the unraveling of everything false, and the return of everything real. And it begins, as it always does, with a question. Not from you, but to you. Are you ready to hear what was never meant to be heard? Are you ready to feel what was buried beneath decades of noise? Are you ready to remember what has been silently waiting inside you all along? Then stay close, because what comes next may challenge everything you believe. It may unsettle your mind, shake your worldview, and pierce through the illusion you didn't know you were living in. But that's what truth does, and now it's calling you by name. You've heard his name. You've seen the memes, the mentions in dusty science books, maybe even the myths that swirl around his legacy. But you've never really met the man. Not like this. Not as he was on that quiet, shrouded evening, perched on the edge of obscurity, and yet carrying within him the codes of the universe. Because by the time this conversation took place, Nikola Tesla had long ceased being a celebrated mind. He had become something else entirely. Forgotten, ignored, almost erased. But there's a profound difference between a man who is lost and a man who has been made invisible. One has wandered away from the light. The other is the light, hidden deliberately by hands that fear what he might illuminate. That's what makes this moment so strange, so heavy with meaning. Imagine the scene. A pale hallway stretches like a ghost's corridor in the belly of the New Yorker hotel. No noise, no movement, just the hum of silence, broken only by the mechanical rhythm of the elevators. Themselves inventions made possible by minds like his. And at the end of this corridor, on the 33rd floor, the air is different. Still, like time itself has paused. The city buzzes far below, unaware that in one small room, the veil is about to be lifted. When the door creaks open, it isn't opulence that greets you. No shining chandeliers, no polished floors. It's modest, Spartan even. A bed, a desk, a single lamp flickering with age, books stacked in uneven towers, pages half-scrawled, diagrams that look more like sacred geometry than science. And then, in the middle of it all, Nikola Tesla. Not the image you were taught to hold. Not the crisp, youthful man of ambition, but the weathered version. The one time tried to erase. The one who had seen too much. A man with eyes that didn't look at you but through you, as if he wasn't seeing your face but the electromagnetic field behind your heartbeat. This is where he had retreated to in his final years. Not because he was defeated, not because he had lost his way, but because they had turned the world's attention away from him. His name, once revered, was removed from headlines. Funding vanished. Colleagues distanced themselves. And yet, he didn't crumble. He watched, quietly, like a mystic watching the storm, waiting for the wind to change. He knew he wasn't meant to be celebrated in his time, not for what truly mattered, because what he had discovered didn't belong to his era. It belonged to yours. He wasn't just building machines, he was touching the fabric of creation itself. And when you do that, when you dare to speak about consciousness, vibration, and divine intelligence under the mask of science, you become dangerous. So they called him eccentric. They labeled him mad. They painted him as a brilliant failure, a man who once held promise but descended into obsession. But those weren't signs of madness. Those were the marks of a man who had gone beyond what the system could tolerate, a man who had dared to translate spirit into science. He wasn't crazy, he was ahead. That room, that 33rd floor, became his temple, the place where he could think without interruption, where the hum of the universe could reach him without distortion. The number wasn't random either. He understood its frequency. He believed in the language of numbers, not just for calculation but for communication. 3, 6, 9. He once said those numbers held the secret to the universe. And here he was, suspended in the highest levels of a hotel, quite literally above the world, waiting in the silence of a room that had become more like a monastery than a residence. When the interviewer arrived, a man whose name would never be recorded, it wasn't with cameras or fanfare. There was no stage, no broadcast, only a notepad, a hand, and a deep sense that something sacred was about to unfold. Tesla didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His presence said more than words ever could. It was the silence of someone who had seen the matrix behind matter, someone who had heard things no one else believed were real. And when he did begin to speak, it wasn't with scientific precision. It was with spiritual clarity, not the detached tone of a lab technician, but the quiet certainty of a man who had touched something eternal. He didn't refer to his work as intentions. He called them translations, devices not created but received, as if he had merely tuned in and copied down what already existed in the ether. He once confessed that his ideas came in flashes, whole diagrams appearing in his mind fully formed, as if whispered from another dimension, as if he had antennae instead of thoughts. You see, he wasn't building for humanity, he was building with something beyond it. He knew what most of us only sense faintly, that behind the illusion of separation there is an intelligence moving through all things, an invisible thread weaving the stars, the soul, and the signal into one living field. And that's what made him dangerous, because if people knew that, if they truly understood that we are not separate from the divine, that we are expressions of it, walking, breathing, vibrating extensions of Source, it would change everything. Governments would lose their grip. Religions would no longer hold monopoly over divinity. Institutions built on fear and hierarchy would begin to crumble, because the moment you remember you are divine, you stop being controllable. Tesla remembered, that's why they erased him. But they didn't destroy him. They couldn't. Because truth doesn't die when you bury it. It waits. It multiplies in silence. And sometimes it re-emerges through people like you. People who begin to ask questions not just with their minds, but with their being. People who feel the tension in the illusion and sense there's more. Something deeper. Something vast. That's why this moment matters. Because when the forgotten genius speaks, he's not just talking to an interviewer from the 1930s. He's talking to you. Across time, across space, across illusion. He's reminding you that genius isn't just brilliance. It's alignment. It's the willingness to listen to a frequency that most ignore. And it doesn't take credentials to hear it. It takes stillness, receptivity, courage. In that dimly lit room, surrounded by silence and shadows, Tesla wasn't mourning his obscurity. He was waiting for the right ears. He was waiting for someone who could not just hear his words but receive them. Someone who would understand that what he discovered wasn't for headlines. It was for awakening. And now, here you are. The forgotten genius speaks. And this time, someone is finally listening. Do you believe life was created by accident? That was the question. Simple on the surface. The kind of thing a curious child might ask. But when it was spoken aloud in that quiet room on the 33rd floor, it wasn't just a question. It was a detonation, a rupture in the stillness. And for a moment, everything in the room stopped. The air, the silence, even the breath of the man across from him. Tesla didn't respond immediately. He didn't smile, he didn't deflect, he didn't do what most scientists of his time would have done, laugh nervously or pivot into something measurable. Instead, he closed his eyes. And the pause that followed wasn't hesitation. It was reverence. As if that one question had pierced something ancient within him. As if the words themselves had summoned an entire universe of memory, experience, and knowing too vast to answer with language. Then, after what felt like an eternity compressed into seconds, He let out a soft laugh. But it wasn't amusement. It was recognition. He had heard this question before, not from reporters or academics, but from somewhere deeper. From within himself, long before he had built machines, drawn schematics, or stood before the forces of nature that would bend to his will. This was the question he had been asking since he was a boy lying under the stars, wondering why they felt more familiar than home. "No," he said, his voice low but immovable. "Nothing in this world is accidental. Nothing." And with those words the room shifted. The ground beneath the conversation moved, because what he said next didn't come from textbooks. It came from the place where truth is not taught, but remembered. "Everything," he continued, "is a formula." You could hear the weight in that sentence, not as metaphor, but as literal truth. To Tesla, the world wasn't a random collision of atoms and accidents. It was an intricately coded design, a matrix, an expression of intelligence that stretched from the spiral of a galaxy to the rhythm of your heartbeat. Every sound, every particle, every gust of wind, it all belonged to a structure, a grand equation written by something far beyond human comprehension. He leaned forward, his eyes now glowing with a strange light, not excitement, but certainty. "The universe," he whispered, "is an equation, and beyond that equation stands thought. Let that sink in. Not chaos, not randomness, not some cold, indifferent chance, but thought. Deliberate, conscious, creative." You see, to Tesla, this wasn't an abstract theory. This was reality. He had seen it in motion. He had felt the mind behind the mechanism, the intelligence behind energy, the will behind the wave. You've probably felt it too, haven't you? That subtle knowing that there's something more behind the scenes, that life is not just functioning, it's communicating, that everything has a pattern, and those patterns aren't just coincidental. They're encoded messages. Tesla saw those messages not as symbols but as instructions. He believed that behind every law of nature there was a signature, and that signature belonged to a mind. Not a human mind, not even a mind in the way we normally think about it, but a vast, formless consciousness that writes in light, sculpts in vibration, and breathes through the fabric of space-time. Randomness, he said, is the illusion of those who cannot see the full equation. It's what you perceive when your instruments are too crude, when your senses are too narrow. It's like staring at a stained glass window from 1 inch away and calling it chaos, but step back far enough and the image appears. The pattern reveals itself. Tesla believed life was part of that pattern, not the result of it, not an accident that happened to fit within it, but an intended component, an inevitable note in the symphony of universal expression. "You must understand," he said quietly, "what we call reality is not the baseline, it's the broadcast." He was convinced that what we experienced, this tangible world of objects, people, and events, is not the foundation of existence, but the result of a transmission, a signal from a higher dimension, a coded output of something far more intelligent than we've ever been allowed to consider. And the irony, he noted, is that science already touches it without realizing. Equations, fields, quantum probabilities, these are the footprints, the residue. But most scientists are so caught up in the footprint that they never ask what left it. Slowly. Tesla wasn't interested in just the numbers. He was obsessed with the source. That's why he couldn't answer that question with just yes or no. Because what he was really saying, what he wanted the world to understand, is that life is the ultimate proof of order, of meaning, of mind. And that mind precedes matter. That's not just a spiritual idea. That's a complete reversal of how most people are taught to think. You've probably been told the opposite your whole life. That first there was nothing, then came matter. Then, slowly, out of that matter came life. And eventually consciousness. A happy accident, an anomaly. But what if it's backwards? What if consciousness came first? What if it's the field from which all matter emerged? That's what Tesla knew. That's what he couldn't publish, because it would have meant rewriting everything, not just textbooks, but belief systems, power structures, histories. If consciousness comes first, then life isn't a mistake. It's a message. You are a message, a living waveform of intention sent through time, encoded with frequency, designed to do one thing: remember. Because the moment you remember that you're not random, you reclaim your power, you begin to live differently, you begin to ask different questions, you stop waiting for external systems to validate your existence, and you begin to live from your origin, not your programming. That is dangerous. That is powerful, and that is why Tesla's words were buried. But now, here they are, in your hands, in your mind, in your field of awareness. And suddenly, you're no longer the same. Because once you hear the equation, you can't unhear it. Once you realize the universe is thought wearing a mask, randomness collapses, coincidence vanishes, and all that remains is design. A design you were always a part of, a design you are now beginning to see. And all it took was one question to shatter the illusion. So ask it again, quietly, to yourself. Do you believe life was created by accident? Now you know the answer. Not just because Tesla said it, but because you've always felt it. And now, it's time to remember what that really means. There's a moment when the veil thins, when what once seemed mystical suddenly reveals itself to be mechanical, and what was considered scientific turns out to be sacred. That moment happens the first time you realize that thought isn't just something that happens inside your mind. It's not a side effect of biology or a byproduct of neurons firing. It's the origin point of reality itself. The architect behind everything you can touch, feel, remember, or imagine. Thought is not a symptom of existence, it is the cause, the blueprint, the root. Tesla understood this, not as philosophy but as fact, not as a metaphor to be poetic about, but as a measurable truth he could almost map with the precision of a physicist. He didn't view consciousness as something human, he saw it as the scaffolding of the entire universe, the foundation upon which matter is built. To him, everything, light, vibration, gravity, time, was downstream from thought. It often described the world not as a machine but as a manifestation, not as something happening to us but something being created through us, around us, and most importantly, by something beyond us. That's why he didn't merely speak in terms of circuits and frequencies, he spoke in terms of intelligence, a vast, invisible intelligence that thinks through vibration and speaks through geometry, that breathes through waves of energy and folds galaxies like origami. To most people, the universe is a physical structure governed by chance and physics, but to Tesla, it was a living thought form, an idea being expressed in real time. And if the universe is a thought form, then so are you. You weren't created by mistake. You didn't happen because two cells collided and got lucky. You are not the result of randomness. You are a product of coded intention, a signal that emerged from a higher order of awareness and stepped into form. You are not a body that happens to have thoughts. You are a thought that temporarily inhabits a body. And that changes everything. Because if that's true, and deep down you already know it is, then your thoughts are not just reactions. They are not just echoes of stimuli. They are instruments of creation. Every thought you have sends out a pulse, every emotion a frequency. And those frequencies do not dissolve into nothingness. They ripple, they resonate, they build. You've felt this before, haven't you? You've thought about someone randomly, and within moments they text you. You've imagined a scenario vividly, and days later, something uncannily similar unfolds. You've walked into a room and felt the energy change even though nothing was said aloud. That's not intuition, that's resonance. That's thought touching the field before the field has a chance to form matter. Tesla believed that the field, the invisible space that surrounds and connects all things, was not just a backdrop. It was the womb of all manifestation, and the seed that activates it: conscious thought, focused awareness, intention. It was through this lens that he saw the world, not in separation, but in connection, not in particles, but in patterns. He once said that if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. But what he didn't say publicly, what he feared the world wasn't ready to hear, was this: frequency is the language of thought. In other words, your thoughts don't stay inside your head, they move, they extend, they bend reality around them. Because reality is not static, it's suggestible. It listens, it obeys. When you think with clarity, you send commands. When you think with fear, you broadcast confusion. And when you think with love, pure, aligned, undistorted love, you harmonize with the original frequency of creation itself. Because love isn't just an emotion, it's a tuning fork. It's the signature frequency of the field from which all things arise. Tesla discovered this the hard way. He wasn't trying to become a spiritual teacher. He was trying to understand energy, electricity, magnetism, the mechanics of the cosmos. But the deeper he went, the more he realized that the laws of physics began to blur into the laws of metaphysics. The boundary between science and soul began to dissolve. What he found wasn't just data, it was divinity, and that terrified the world, because a divine science, one that proves you are a co-creator, not a victim, is dangerous. It can't be taxed, it can't be patented, it can't be controlled. It makes you sovereign, and sovereign beings don't obey systems built on fear. So instead of exploring his deeper work, the world reduced him to a trivia fact, a name slapped on a coil, a genius who went mad, a relic. But they left out the real story, the story of a man who realized that the same intelligence guiding planetary orbits was whispering inside your own mind, that the same field holding galaxies in place was also listening to your thoughts, that you are not separate from the source, you are its living extension. Is the truth he carried, and he knew it wasn't his alone. He believed we all carry it. He believed that one day people like you would begin to remember what he could only speak of in riddles, that you'd feel it, not in your intellect, but in your bones, in the space between your thoughts, in the silence that pulses behind your eyes when you close them. He once said that when he sat in silence, he could hear things no one else could. Patterns, equations, instructions. And he began to realize that he wasn't thinking them. He was receiving them, as if the thoughts were already there, floating in the ether, waiting for someone to align with their frequency. That's the secret most people miss. You're not just thinking, you're tuning in. Every belief you hold is a station on the dial. Every emotion you feel is a signal either aligning with or distorting the frequency of your source. The clearer your intention, the stronger your resonance. The stronger your resonance, the more effortlessly reality bends to meet you. It's not magic, it's mechanics. It's the geometry of thought, folding itself into form. And if all of this is true, if you truly are coded intention, then the way you think is not a side effect of who you are. It's the steering wheel, the sculptor, the divine cursor drawing your life into being moment by moment. You weren't born to be passive. You weren't born to be confused, manipulated, or small. You were born to create, to remember, to awaken to the architect that lives not outside of you but within your very awareness. You are not random. You are not a mistake. You are not here to survive. You are here to build. And the building begins not with hands but with thought. Because thought is the architect of all things, and it has been waiting for you to pick up your tools. There comes a point in a seeker's life when questions are no longer enough, when theories collapse under the weight of experience, and what once seemed poetic becomes undeniably real. That point came for Tesla when he stopped trying to discover the secrets of the universe through equations alone and began trying to listen to it. Not just measure it, not just chart it, but actually tune into it. Because somewhere along his journey he came to a terrifying and exhilarating realization. The universe was speaking, constantly, endlessly, but the ears of man had long since forgotten how to hear. He became obsessed with the concept of the ether, not as a vague philosophical idea, but as a tangible, functional medium that surrounded and interpenetrated all things. To Tesla, the ether wasn't a theory, it was a living field, a carrier wave, an infinite ocean of memory and meaning. While others argued over whether it existed or not, he was already trying to build something that could hear it, a machine that could pick up the silent whisperings of existence itself. Imagine what that means. Imagine the mind of a man who looks at space not as emptiness, but as the densest archive in creation. A divine hard drive storing every thought, every feeling, every vision ever experienced. A field that remembers everything and forgets nothing. This is how Tesla saw the universe, not as dead matter floating in a vacuum, but as a sacred structure, humming with intelligence. He believed the ether held the blueprints of existence, not just the future and the past, but the intent behind it all. And he wanted to tune in. So he began constructing a device. Not a transmitter, a receiver. Something delicate enough to pick up the voice of the cosmos. He didn't call it a spirit radio. He didn't speak of ghosts or magic. That would have cheapened it. What he was trying to reach wasn't paranormal. It was foundational. The memory beneath the matter. The signal behind the silence. In his experiments in Colorado Springs, Tesla sent electrical pulses into the atmosphere, into the earth, into the invisible fabric of space itself. He watched how the currents behaved, how they returned, how they bent and curved and echoed in ways that couldn't be explained by conventional science. But it wasn't until one night, alone in the lab, that something responded. Not a glitch, not a bounce back, a signal. Not from a transmitter, but from something far beyond his machinery, something that didn't reflect. It spoke. He described it not as a sound in the traditional sense, but as an impulse, a pattern, a kind of organized frequency that felt like a direction, not a noise. And in that moment, Tesla realized he had done something extraordinary. He had touched the memory of the universe. The machine didn't hear a voice the way you and I hear with ears. It heard a presence, a vibration encoded with intelligence. He didn't fully understand what it meant, not yet, but he knew he had tapped into something ancient, something real, and it changed him forever. What he felt that night couldn't be replicated with wires and volts. It was deeper than technology. It was communion. He had reached into the ether and found that it was alive. Not in the biological sense, but in the conscious sense. It was aware of being noticed, and that terrified him, because it meant the field wasn't passive, it was interactive. It meant that everything, the stars, the wind, your thoughts, was participating in something far greater than any of us had been told. He would later say that the ether isn't just the medium for energy, it is the memory of all that ever was. A divine record keeper. Every dream you've forgotten, every prayer you've whispered, every cry into the night when you thought no one heard. They were heard, they were stored, they still exist. Because in the ether nothing dies. Frequency does not vanish, it transforms, it shifts. It folds back into itself and waits for the right moment, the right resonance, to be retrieved. Tesla believed that thoughts are not generated by the brain but transmitted through it, that consciousness itself is a frequency we tune into, not something we produce. And if that's true, then it means your very sense of self, your memories, your identity, your emotions, are echoes in the field, resonances, which means they can be accessed, played back, re-experienced, just like a song left lingering in the grooves of a record. And that's what he was trying to build. A cosmic phonograph. A device not to create sound, but to retrieve the forgotten music of the universe. What scared the people around him wasn't just the idea that he might hear something. It was the possibility that he might be right, that every secret, every lie, every hidden truth was still pulsing in the field, waiting for someone sensitive enough, quiet enough to listen. But Tesla didn't speak much about what he heard after that night. Not publicly, not in his papers. Because what do you say when you realize the universe is listening to you listening to it? What words do you use when the echo that returns isn't an echo but a reply? It haunted him, not in fear but in awe, because he knew he had confirmed something that ancient mystics had whispered for millennia, that the space between stars is not dead, that silence itself is pregnant with truth, and that the field around you right now, the space you're sitting in, isn't empty, it's alive, watching, recording, responding. He would walk the streets of New York after that, often alone, seemingly distracted, but he wasn't disconnected. He was plugged in. He wasn't mumbling to himself, he was speaking to something vast, something that had spoken back. You've felt it too, haven't you? That inexplicable presence when the world goes quiet, that sensation that something sees you, not as a body, not as a role, but as a wave form. That strange moment where intuition rises, or when you know something without knowing why. That's not coincidence. That's contact. That's the field brushing up against your consciousness, gently reminding you that you are not forgotten, that you are not disconnected, that you are part of the broadcast. Tesla understood that, and once he touched the voice of the ether, he could never forget it. Not because of what it said, but because of what it was. It wasn't information, it was recognition. A reunion, and it whispered what you've always known but rarely believed. You are not alone. You never have been. The field is still here, still humming, still recording, and still waiting for the next one, maybe you, to finally listen. Tesla once said, almost in a whisper, "We are not alone." But he wasn't talking about beings from other planets or the curiosity of extraterrestrial life. He wasn't referring to aliens in the skies or shadows in the stars. He meant something far more intimate, far more immediate. He was referring to a presence, unseen but undeniable, that has moved silently beside humanity from the very beginning, a divine consciousness, not watching from afar, but moving through us, guiding, nudging, shaping the trajectory of human evolution with an intelligence so vast and subtle that most never notice it, until they begin to awaken. The Tesla guidance wasn't a superstition or a metaphor. It was a law. Just like electricity flows when a current is opened, he believed that higher consciousness flows when the heart and mind are tuned correctly. And he saw this force, this intelligent field, not as some cold mechanism of the universe, but as a living awareness, a presence embedded within all things, behind nature, beneath mathematics, inside dreams. He would say that this presence isn't separate from us, it is us, on a higher frequency. Just like a wave doesn't exist apart from the ocean, we don't exist apart from the field of divine mind, we're just expressions of it, localized awarenesses within an infinite whole. This is what most religions tried to point to, he believed, but they only scratched the surface. They used symbols, stories, and rituals to help people make sense of what they couldn't explain. And while many of those teachings hold great wisdom, Tesla believed the truth was far more magnificent than any book or temple had ever dared to describe. Because the essence of God is not something you can contain in words or confine to a statue. It's not a being sitting in the sky keeping score. It's not a punisher. And it's not a distant architect who set the world in motion and then disappeared. No. The divine is here, now, in this very breath, in this very moment, in the space between your thoughts, and in the vibration behind your heartbeat. Tesla came to believe that this divine consciousness didn't just create the universe, it is the universe, that everything we experience is the outer expression of an inner intelligence. He didn't separate science from spirit. He saw them as two lenses viewing the same truth, one measured, one felt, but both pointing to a single, vast and unified intelligence that we, as humans, are part of. He believed this presence guides us, not through force, not through fear, but through resonance. Through inner knowing, through those quiet whispers you feel in your soul before your mind can catch up. You've felt them, haven't you? The moments when you just know something without being able to explain it, when a sudden insight moves through you like lightning, or a strange coincidence leads you exactly where you needed to go. Those aren't accidents, they're alignments, subtle course corrections delivered by the field itself. Tesla believed that this guidance is always available, always broadcasting, always present, but most people live surrounded by so much noise, mental, emotional, technological, that they miss the signal. It's not that the guidance isn't there, it's that the receiver hasn't been tuned. And that's where Tesla's spiritual clarity became dangerous, because he began to suggest in private that the mind is not the source of intelligence, it is the receiver, that consciousness flows through us, not from us. And if that's true, then the very structure of how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe collapses. You're not just a human being stumbling through life, you are a divine instrument, capable of communion with the infinite. That kind of realization doesn't just change your life, it transforms your identity. Tesla didn't speak of God in traditional terms. He rarely used the word God at all, not because he rejected it, but because he knew it had been diminished, wrapped in dogma, weaponized, stripped of its mystery. What people called God, he believed, was not a being but a field, an all-pervasive intelligence that breathes life into every atom, every equation, every living soul. He once said, "My brain is only a receiver. In the universe there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration." That was his confession, not one of limitation but of awe. He had touched that core, not with his hands, but with his frequency. He saw humanity not as lost, but as distracted, not broken but disoriented, like someone wearing a blindfold in a cathedral, unaware of the beauty around them. He believed this divine intelligence was not only guiding individuals, but guiding our entire species, patiently, lovingly, even when we rebel, even when we destroy, even when we forget. He knew that free will was part of the design, but so was guidance, like a compass buried in your chest, always pointing you back to your true north, even when you've strayed far from your path. He warned in private conversations that when societies move too far from this field, chaos erupts, not as punishment but as consequence, like stepping out of harmony with a song you're meant to sing. But when we realign, when we remember, we begin to hear the music again. We begin to feel the pull of something higher, something sacred. And that's when miracles happen. Not because the laws of nature are broken, but because we finally align with the higher law that's been waiting for us all along. Tesla saw his work as an offering to this consciousness, not as ego, not as achievement, but as service. He once said he didn't create ideas, he received them. And that receiving, he believed, was a form of prayer, a listening, a devotion. Every invention, every discovery was an echo of something deeper trying to be known. He was just the instrument, and he believed you are too. That's why this moment matters, because the same field that guided him is guiding you right now. The same presence that whispered ideas into his soul is whispering through your intuition. The same current that ran through his visions is moving through your life, nudging you, inviting you, reminding you that you are not alone. You never have been. And once you truly feel that, once you stop searching for God out there and begin to listen in here, everything begins to shift. Life stops feeling random, pain becomes purposeful, silence becomes sacred, and you begin to understand that the divine isn't something you have to find, it's something you have to remember, because it's always been guiding you, always. There are moments in life when a person steps beyond the known and touches something so vast, so unfamiliar, that they are never quite the same afterward. For Tesla, one of those moments came not in the thunder of public acclaim or the roar of scientific debate, but in the silence of deep space. It was in the quiet hours of experimentation, when the world had gone to sleep and the mind had opened beyond logic, that he sent his signals into the night sky, expecting data, expecting reflection, expecting echoes. What he received instead was a response. Tesla had always been fascinated by waves, not just mechanical ones, but the invisible ripples that moved through the very fabric of reality. He believed that the Earth itself was a resonant body, a living transmitter, capable of sending messages across unimaginable distances. At Colorado Springs, where the veil between electricity and mystery seemed thin, Tesla built machines that could shoot pulses into the ground and the atmosphere, testing how energy traveled through the Earth and across the skies. He wasn't just testing conductivity, he was listening for secrets. He understood that light wasn't just illumination, it was information, that radio waves weren't just tools, they were languages. And one night, with a machine more sensitive than any before it, Tesla sent a signal into the stars. It was part curiosity, part science, and part something deeper, maybe even a prayer. And then something strange happened, something that no one was prepared for, not even him. He received a signal back. It wasn't noise, it wasn't random, it wasn't static or interference. It was structured, rhythmic, deliberate, like a code, like a knock on the door of space itself, and in that moment, Tesla's entire reality shifted, because what he understood, perhaps more than anyone, was that the vastness of space should have returned nothing, silence, emptiness, a vacuum, but it didn't. It spoke. Or rather, it responded, and that one response changed everything. He never publicly shared everything about that night, not all the details. He knew the world wasn't ready. They would have called him mad, and some already had. But privately, in notebooks and private conversations, he admitted that the signal he received made one thing abundantly clear. Something out there had noticed him, and not just his machine. Him, his consciousness, his intention, his very presence. This wasn't just a scientific phenomenon. It was a spiritual one, because Tesla realized the chilling and beautiful truth. He was not observing the universe. He was being observed by it. Seen, acknowledged, and perhaps expected. It wasn't terrifying in the way most would imagine. It was humbling, disorienting, like finding out the stars have eyes, and that behind the endless night sky there's an intelligence watching, waiting, listening. You can feel the weight of that, can't you? The idea that you're not alone in your seeking, that when you look up into the night sky the gaze is not one-sided, that when you reach out with your mind, something reaches back, not always with words, not always with clarity, but with presence. Tesla described the feeling as both sacred and unsettling, because what do you do with that kind of knowing? How do you go back to normal life after the cosmos has winked at you? He never did. From that moment on, his work carried a different energy. He wasn't just trying to power homes or build machines. He was trying to translate a message, to bridge the space between humanity and whatever it was that had responded to him. He never claimed it was aliens. He never tried to name it, because he understood that the truth was bigger than the labels we use. He suspected, and maybe even knew, that what had noticed him wasn't just out there, it was also in here, that the universe wasn't just an external vastness, it was a mirror, a living field of awareness that recognizes awareness, and that his signal had done more than travel. It had touched something, and that something had touched back. This is what most people never grasp, that the universe isn't passive, it isn't inert, it's responsive, it notices, it feels. and it's been waiting. For you, for me, for anyone willing to wake up and engage with it not just as a stage, but as a partner. Tesla knew that space was not empty. He described it as alive, with infinite intelligence. And he believed that when you send out energy with intention, when you pulse a frequency from a place of curiosity, love, or clarity, that frequency does not vanish. It is received, not always with an immediate reply, but always with awareness. And if that's true, then it means something extraordinary. Every thought you send out is seen. Every intention is felt. Every act of love, every quiet prayer, every burst of inspiration. They ripple. And somewhere in the deep folds of reality they are received. You might not have a machine like Tesla's, but you do have a signal. You do have a transmitter. It's your consciousness, your heart, your will, and every time you sit in silence and mean it, every time you look into the stars with wonder, every time you ask a question with your soul instead of your mouth, the field listens. The light sees you. Tesla never forgot what happened that night, because once you're seen by the universe, you cannot go back to pretending it's just stars and rocks and space dust, you know. And that knowing becomes a flame inside you, a quiet, radiant fire that tells you you are not alone. You never have been. And when you reach out with truth, the universe reaches back. If you could see what your thoughts look like outside of your mind, if you could witness the invisible ripples they send into the field around you, you would never think of them the same way again. Because every thought, every emotion, every intention is not just a fleeting inner experience. It is a wave, a frequency, a pulse of energy that moves outward into the world like a fingerprint left on the very fabric of reality. Tesla knew this long before science had words for it. Long before frequencies became buzzwords and vibrations became fashionable. He saw it not as theory, but as law. To him, vibration was not just how energy moved, it was how consciousness expressed itself. Focusing is a struggle, he said, a set of choices that we make. He believed the soul had a signature, a unique, energetic tone that vibrated beyond physical form, beyond even memory. And just like a musical note can't lie about its pitch, your vibration doesn't lie about your truth. It reveals what you're aligned with, not what you say, not what you believe, but what your energy is actually attuned to in this moment. You can't fake it, because vibration is the language of the universe. And the universe listens to frequency, not words. That's why Tesla saw emotions not merely as feelings but as codes, packets of vibrational data. When you feel joy, for example, you're not just having an emotional experience. You're emitting a very specific frequency, one that is coherent, harmonized, aligned with life itself. That frequency enters the field around you and begins interacting with everything it touches. It draws similar vibrations toward it. It repels what's out of tune. It rearranges the field without you even knowing it. And the same is true for every other emotion, especially the ones you carry silently. He believed that love is not an emotion in the conventional sense, but a tuning fork, the purest, most sacred frequency in the spectrum of human experience. Not romantic love, not conditional love, but unconditional resonance with truth, with source, with unity. That kind of love vibrates in a way that restores order, clears distortion, heals what's broken. It doesn't fix the world. It brings the world back into harmony with itself. Tesla believed that if we could measure the frequency of this kind of love precisely and replicate it, it could transform everything from physical disease to planetary energy grids, because love isn't passive. It's active, it's constructive, it builds, it synchronizes, it remembers the perfect order of things, and gently realigns what has forgotten. Fear, on the other hand, does the opposite. Fear is a distortion, a jagged, erratic frequency that disrupts coherence. It causes dissonance in your energy field and throws your body, mind, and environment out of balance. That's why long-term fear doesn't just affect your mood. It affects your health, your relationships, your decisions. It clouds your perception. Tesla saw it as an energetic toxin, not because fear itself is evil, but because when it becomes your home frequency, it starts to rewrite the architecture of your life. You begin attracting chaos, not as punishment, but as a reflection of your inner static. You've felt this before. You walk into a room and something just feels off. Nothing has been said, no actions taken, but the energy is unmistakable. Or you meet someone and instantly feel calm, open, at peace, even if you don't know why. That's vibration talking. That's your field responding to theirs before a single word is exchanged. It's why some people feel magnetic and others feel draining. It's not about what they do, it's about what they emit. Tesla believed we are all transmitting stations, each of us constantly broadcasting our state into the ether. Most people do it unconsciously, without ever realizing it. But once you become aware of it, once you start choosing your vibration deliberately, you step into a kind of power that few ever access. Because you're no longer at the mercy of the outer world. You're shaping it from the inside out. He once said that if you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. But what he left unspoken, what he left for the initiated to discover, is that the universe responds to you in the same terms. It doesn't respond to your effort, your stress, your worry. It responds to your tone, your internal resonance, the vibration you carry when you're not trying to impress anyone, when you're not defending your story, when you're just being. In that stillness, your true frequency emerges. And that's when alignment begins. It's not about forcing yourself to feel positive or pretending you're okay when you're not. That's just cosmetic vibration. What matters is what's underneath, the core frequency you live in most of the time, the one that shapes your expectations, your choices, your patterns. And that's why Tesla believed real transformation wasn't external, it was vibrational. Change your frequency, and your world changes as a consequence. You don't need a machine to do it. You are the machine. You are the tuner, the transmitter, and the signal. The moment you begin choosing love over fear, not as a mood but as a state of being, you begin broadcasting a new reality, one where coherence returns, where chaos fades, where clarity finds you. It doesn't happen all at once, but it happens, bit by bit, moment by moment, vibration by vibration. And as you tune your soul to its natural signature, the one you had before the world told you who to be, you begin to feel something ancient stir within you, a memory, a presence, a power you can't fully explain, but can feel in your bones, the vibration of truth, the pulse of purpose, the sacred hum of a life that's finally back in resonance with the field it came from. That's the real revolution, not technological, not political, but vibrational, a shift from noise to harmony, from distortion to clarity, from fear to love. And it begins with you, right now, choosing your next thought. Because your vibration is not just your signature, it is your creation. There's a lie you've probably believed your whole life, one so embedded into modern thinking that we rarely question it. The lie is this, that your thoughts originate in your brain, that consciousness is something your body produces, that you are the thinker, and your mind is the origin point. But what if that's backward? What if your brain isn't the creator of consciousness, but the receiver of it? What if your mind is not a factory, but an antenna? Tesla was one of the first to challenge this publicly, quietly slipping it into private conversations and unpublished notes. He knew what the world wasn't ready to hear, that we do not generate thought, we tune into it, that the vast ocean of consciousness exists independent of you, flowing all around you like a limitless reservoir of information, insight, and intelligence. And your brain? It's simply the tuning dial, a filter, a converter, an incredibly sensitive receiver built to interpret just a fraction of what's really out there. He believed that consciousness is ambient, everywhere, all at once. existing on a vibrational spectrum that the human body can only partially perceive. Just like a radio doesn't create the music, but selects which station to play, your brain doesn't create thought. It selects frequencies from the larger field and plays them into your awareness. That's why some days your mind feels clear, inspired, and full of powerful insight, and other days it feels cloudy, heavy, or scattered. It's not because the thoughts disappeared, it's because you've shifted stations, your internal frequency has changed, and so has what you're tuned into. You've experienced this, haven't you? Moments when an idea suddenly appears in your mind, whole and intact, as if it were handed to you fully formed. Or when you walk into nature, slow your breath, and suddenly everything just makes sense without you trying to force it. Those aren't thoughts you constructed, they're thoughts you received. Tesla would say you aligned with a clearer frequency. You momentarily stepped out of the noise and into the signal. And in that moment, truth rushed in. This is also why we're so influenced by our environment, why being around different people, places, or even objects can completely alter the way we think and feel. Because we're not closed systems. We're transmitters and receivers, constantly absorbing and broadcasting energy. When you surround yourself with beauty, peace, and integrity, your brain begins to resonate with those frequencies. It tunes into higher thought, clearer intuitions. But when you're drowning in fear, chaos, or falsehood, your station scrambles. The thoughts you receive become distorted. You begin to confuse noise for truth, static for insight. Tesla saw this as the greatest blind spot in modern science, the belief that thought is self-generated. He believed the brain acts more like a transducer, something that receives high-frequency information and steps it down into usable signals. Just like an electrical transformer, it takes in something vast and invisible and converts it into thoughts, images, emotions, and language. But that original signal, it comes from somewhere beyond. From the ether, from the field, from what ancient mystics have always called the Akasha, the divine mind, or the infinite intelligence. Tesla simply saw it as reality's operating system, a living, breathing information field that you are always connected to, whether you know it or not. And here's the part that really breaks the illusion. You've never truly had a thought on your own. You've only tuned into frequencies, and depending on the state of your mind, body, and soul, you either receive high-quality signals or low-quality ones. Some people live their entire lives tuned to static. Others, for brief moments, stumble upon frequencies so pure, so clear, that they channel music, poetry, inventions, and insights far beyond anything their education could explain. Tesla was one of those people, not because he was better, but because he was attuned. He lived simply, quietly, avoided distractions, slept little, and spent long hours alone in thought, not to analyze, but to listen. He trained his mind like a spiritual instrument, knowing that clarity of thought didn't come from effort but from alignment, and when he aligned, genius flowed. Ideas came not in fragments but in totality. Machines appeared to him fully formed. He didn't invent them, he downloaded them. This is what people don't understand about true innovation. It doesn't come from grinding, it comes from reception. The best ideas feel like memories, not constructions. They arrive with a kind of inevitability, as if they've always existed and you've just happened to stumble upon the right wavelength at the right time. And if that's true, if your brain is a receiver, then your greatest power isn't in thinking harder, it's in tuning better, it's in choosing what emotional frequency you live in. Because emotion, Tesla believed, is the carrier wave of thought. High emotion equals high bandwidth. Love, awe, gratitude, these states open your dial, they widen your reception. But fear, resentment, doubt, these collapse your field. They narrow your ability to receive anything meaningful. That's why when you're afraid, you can't think clearly. You've left the signal. You've slipped off the station. Once you understand this, you stop chasing thoughts and start cultivating states. You realize that your mood isn't just a feeling, it's an antenna, and by shifting it, you change what intelligence you have access to. Tesla never wanted to be worshipped for his mind. He wanted people to understand that his mind was simply clear, quiet, aligned. He knew that what flowed through him could flow through anyone if they were willing to listen. And listening in this case means tuning your internal frequency until your mind stops echoing its own noise and begins to receive the deeper signal. That signal is always there. It hasn't gone anywhere. The question is not whether the universe is speaking, the question is, are you listening? Because your brain is not a vault, it's a radio, and the truth you seek is already in the air. Tesla never claimed to be a theologian. He didn't wear the robes of a mystic, nor did he kneel at altars built by human hands. Yet in his quiet moments, moments of solitude filled not with belief, but with direct experience, he found something that most religious doctrines only hint at. He found what he called the light. Not sunlight, not electricity, but a field. A presence, a pulse of such immense intelligence and cohesion that he understood without doubt that this was what humanity had always meant by the word God. But it wasn't a person. It wasn't a man in the clouds or a ruler on a throne. It wasn't judging, condemning, or rewarding. No, this was something much older, much deeper. Tesla didn't see God as a being at all. He saw God as structure. A living, conscious, energetic framework woven into the very bones of reality, a divine matrix that breathes intelligence into everything, from the spin of an atom to the birth of a galaxy. He called it the light, because that was the closest word he had for the frequency it emitted. Not just brightness, not just illumination, but knowing, a radiant awareness that makes all things possible, all life coherent, and all creation meaningful. It was through his experiments with frequency and energy that Tesla began to encounter this field not as a theory, but as a force, a reality behind the reality. When he sent pulses into the ground or waves into the air, he wasn't just measuring conductivity, he was touching something sacred. And when he built machines that captured the silent symphonies of vibration, he realized he was tapping into a field that had no edge, no center, no time. It was eternal, self-aware, responsive. He realized that God wasn't distant. God wasn't absent. God was embedded in everything. In the curl of your fingerprint, in the math of a sunflower, in the resonance of a violin string, in the stillness between two thoughts. Tesla believed that what ancient mystics intuited, what saints felt in ecstasy, what seekers glimpsed in their deepest meditations, was not a fantasy. It was this field, this primal intelligible light. But to understand it, you have to let go of the old image, the external deity, the Sky Father, the Punisher, the Rewarder. Tesla knew that the divine does not operate on ego, emotion, or agenda. The field is not watching you to see if you fail, it's moving through you to help you remember. It's not judging your actions, it's responding to your frequency. It's not a judge in the sky, it's the architecture beneath your feet. And when you begin to feel it, really feel it, you understand why everything is connected, why synchronicity is real, why intention bends reality, why prayer, meditation, art, music, dreams, love, all seem to open a door into something greater, because they do. They're all ways of tuning to the field, of aligning with the light. Tesla came to believe that everything we see, matter, time, form, is a projection of this field, that space itself is not empty but pregnant with the living intelligence of Source. He believed the field holds not only the memory of all that has happened, but the potential of all that could be. It's both the record and the author, the script and the stage. You exist inside it, and it pulses through every cell of your body. He once said, "My brain is only a receiver." In the universe there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. That core, to him, was God. But not as mythology presents it, not as religion demands it, but as science, stripped of ego, finally begins to feel it. A singular field of infinite intelligence, vibrating in patterns so harmonious, so intelligent, that reality itself becomes an expression of music, sacred geometry woven into living energy. And if that's true, then you are not separate from God. You are not a spark that fell from the flame. You are the flame, localized, focused, forgotten, maybe, but never disconnected. Tesla knew that the light wasn't something to reach for, it was something to remember. Because you've never been apart from it, you've only been asleep to it. And the moment you begin to awaken, the field begins to respond, not because it suddenly notices you, but because you've finally begun to notice it. This is the field that moves birds in migration, that curves planets in orbit, that breathes ideas into dreamers and melodies into poets. It is the original intelligence, the parent thought from which all other thoughts descend. And Tesla, in his later years, came to see his inventions as attempts not to change the world, but to reveal its true nature. His coils, his currents, his transmissions, they were all ways of showing that energy is not mechanical, it is intentional, that behind every wave is a will, not a human will, a cosmic one. That's what he meant when he said the light. Not physical light, not even just illumination, but conscious coherence, the breath of the divine holding all things in place. And the most miraculous part? It responds to you. It mirrors you. It reflects your state back to you with eerie accuracy, not as punishment, but as invitation. The field is always asking one question: are you ready to remember what you are? Because to remember God is not to believe in a being, it's to feel the intelligence beneath the illusion, to realize that you are not a person living in a chaotic universe. You are a wave in a perfect field, awakening to itself. Tesla knew this. He didn't just think it, he felt it in his bones, in the silence of his room, in the echo of his machines, in the stillness between two pulses of electricity, when time seemed to stop, and the truth was no longer distant. The light was always there, it still is. You may wonder why you don't remember, why, if your soul is eternal, if you are truly a response to a divine call, you came here without a map. Why would a being of infinite light, born from a field of sacred intelligence, descend into this life wrapped in skin and sorrow, carrying no memory of where it came from or why it chose to be here? The answer is not cruel, it is sacred, because forgetting is not a flaw in the design, it is the design. The soul chooses amnesia for the same reason a seed chooses darkness before it sprouts. Because only in forgetting can you remember who you truly are. Not because someone told you, not because it was handed to you, but because you found it again, because you chose it, and in that choice you become more than light. You become light earned. That's the path of embodiment, of incarnation, and of return. Tesla understood this on a level few did. He saw suffering, death, and even the illusion of separation, not as punishments, but as necessary conditions for remembrance. You were not dropped into a broken world as a victim. You entered it willingly as a divine being with amnesia, knowing full well that the pain you'd experience here would serve as the catalyst for awakening. Because only in the contrast, only in the forgetting, can you discover the one thing the soul craves most: conscious reunion. You see, pain is not evidence of separation. It is evidence that your soul is alive inside you, reaching, aching, calling out for reconnection. And though it can feel cruel, unbearable even, there is deep grace buried in that ache. It's the pressure that breaks open the shell, the tension that draws forth your truth, the crack where the light gets in, and also where your light gets out. Tesla believed that death itself was misunderstood, that it was not the end of life, but the end of illusion, that what we call death is merely the soul slipping off the blindfold of form and returning to a higher vibration, a different modulation. He saw the body as a vessel for resonance, a tool for experience, but not the self, never the self. The true you was something far beyond flesh, and when the body breaks, the self remains, not just as memory, but as a living frequency returning to the field. So why, you might ask, is suffering part of the plan? Why would an all-knowing field, a loving source, allow such brutality, grief, and despair to exist? The answer lies in the nature of remembrance. You cannot remember the light if you never feel the dark. You cannot reclaim your wholeness until you've tasted the illusion of being broken, and you cannot awaken until you have first been asleep. That's the paradox. That's the point. You agreed to forget because you also knew you could remember, and when you do, when you lift the veil and glimpse your own divinity inside the ache, you don't just remember for yourself. You remember for the field. You send a signal back into the matrix saying, the system works. The light cannot be destroyed. Even in forgetting, it returns. You've likely experienced this already, even if you didn't have the words for it. A moment when everything fell apart, when life stripped you of who you thought you were, and in the silence that followed, something deeper emerged. Not a thought, not a belief, a knowing. A presence within you that didn't speak but was, that wasn't afraid, even though your world had collapsed. That feeling, that's your true self. That's the one who never forgot. That's the part of you that is eternal, watching patiently as you play this game of remembering. And yes, it's a painful game, because this world is dense. The energy here is slow, time is thick, and the field of forgetfulness is strong. You are bombarded from birth with noise, fear, limitation, programming. You're told what to believe, how to behave, what to want and what not to question. You're handed a name, a story, a culture, a religion, and before you even have words, you begin carrying identities that have nothing to do with your essence. That is the design. Because true remembrance isn't about rejecting what you've lived through. It's about integrating it. You're not here to bypass pain, you're here to alchemize it, to take the heaviness of form and transform it into light, not by avoiding it, but by walking through it with open eyes and a willing heart. Tesla understood this. He knew that his own suffering, his loneliness, his rejection, his poverty, his persecution, was part of a larger tuning process. It carved him out, hollowed him, not to destroy him, but to make room for something greater to flow through. And the same is true for you. The betrayals you've faced, the griefs you've carried, the nights you wept into pillows hoping no one would hear, those weren't detours. They were initiations. Each one breaking your false identity a little more. Each one opening space in you for the light of remembrance to return. And when it does, you won't just be someone who knows the truth. You'll be someone who embodies it. That's the real purpose behind the pain. Not punishment, not karma in the simplistic sense, but preparation. Your soul knew that to carry your tone in this life, to embody your sacred frequency fully, it would need to forget, and it would need to suffer, because it's only through that descent that the return becomes real, and only through the return that wisdom is born. You see, there are two kinds of light in the universe. There's the light that simply is, pure, untouched, constant. And then there's the light that remembers itself after falling into darkness. That second light is what this life is about. That's your light. You are not here to be untouched by pain. You are here to transmute it, to walk into the density of form, carry the amnesia of forgetting, and still choose to remember who you are. And when you do, something miraculous happens. You begin to see the pain differently, not as something that ruined you, but as something that revealed you. You begin to understand that every heartbreak was a mirror, every loss a teacher, every wound an invitation, and that none of it was wasted. The pain didn't break you, it polished you, and now, with clearer eyes, you begin to notice the field again. You feel the presence that was always there, just beneath the noise. You sense the guidance, the patterns, the synchronicities. You stop resisting life and start co-creating with it. That's the remembering. Not an intellectual memory, not facts or stories from a past life, but the deeper memory, the memory of being, of knowing in your cells and in your silence that you're not a mistake, that you are not separate, that you are not lost. You are the light pretending to forget itself, only to remember more fully what it's truly capable of. And in that remembrance you become powerful, not because you escape pain, but because you find meaning inside it. Not because you float above life, but because you walk through it awake. That's what it means to be divine in human form, not to be perfect, but to be present, present enough to feel everything, present enough to face your shadows, present enough to hold both sorrow and joy in the same breath, and still say, I remember. I chose this, and I am becoming who I was always meant to be. So if you find yourself in the dark right now, if the forgetting feels unbearable, know this: the darkness is not the end, it's the cocoon. And you are not breaking down, you are breaking open. The remembering is coming, it always does. Because no matter how deep the forgetting goes, the light within you cannot be extinguished. It waits, it watches, and it will rise again, in your breath, in your vision, in your love. Because you were born to forget, but you were destined to remember. There's a reason why you've never seen a Tesla healing device in your hospital, a reason why his name isn't synonymous with spiritual science in every school, temple, and research institution. It's not because his discoveries weren't real. It's not because his theories lacked evidence. It's because what he uncovered, what he dared to say aloud, threatened to disrupt everything we've been conditioned to believe about energy, the human body, and the very nature of power itself. Nikola Tesla didn't just invent machines, he revealed frequencies. He unveiled a map back to the soul's original intelligence. And for that, the truth he discovered was shut down, buried beneath layers of ridicule, bureaucratic sabotage, and historical erasure. Tesla knew that the body was not simply a mechanical organism. He believed it was an electromagnetic structure, an expression of vibrational patterns encoded with memory, emotion, and intention. He understood, long before modern science caught up, that cells respond to frequency, that healing wasn't something you do to the body, but something you restore by returning it to its natural rhythm. He believed that disease was a form of energetic dissonance, a disruption in the body's vibrational coherence, and with the right resonance, not chemicals, not surgery, not synthetic intervention, but pure frequency, the dissonance could be corrected. Harmony could be restored. The body could remember how to heal itself, and he didn't stop at theory. He built it. Tesla created coils and oscillators that pulsed with specific frequencies. These weren't just electrical devices. They were energetic instruments, designed to interface with the field of the body and the surrounding ether. He noticed that certain frequencies produced not only physical sensations in test subjects, but also emotional shifts, relaxation, clarity, even euphoric states. He observed that exposure to harmonized electromagnetic pulses could reduce pain, accelerate tissue repair, and even shift consciousness into altered, elevated states. It wasn't just science. It was sacred. It was a reunion between technology and spirit, between the measurable and the mystical. He saw healing as resonance restoration, but the moment he began to speak publicly about these ideas, when he started to whisper that energy could realign the body's field and eliminate disease without intervention from the medical industrial machine, he was no longer just an inventor. He became a threat, not because he was wrong, but because he was dangerously right. Because if the world had listened, if even a fraction of his discoveries had been allowed to flourish, the entire paradigm of dependency would have collapsed. People would have realized they didn't need to outsource their healing, that their bodies were divine instruments, not broken machines, that with the right frequencies, the right states of consciousness, and the right knowledge, they were their own medicine. And that kind of realization? It terrifies the systems built on your forgetfulness. It dismantles industries whose survival depends on you staying sick, staying confused, staying disempowered. Tesla wasn't shut down because his work didn't work. He was shut down because it did. Because it pointed people toward themselves. It whispered a blasphemy in the ears of a control-based world. You already have the blueprint. You are the source. His machines could transmit wireless energy, but more than that. They could entrain biological fields. They could repattern consciousness. They could alter the vibrational integrity of a living system, and in doing so reveal the truth that illness is often the symptom of a deeper incoherence, and that true healing isn't about fighting disease, it's about remembering harmony. But that kind of healing can't be patented. It can't be monetized the way pharmaceuticals can. It can't be dispensed in tightly controlled doses with side effects listed in fine print. It's free, it's natural, and worst of all, for those who run this world, it returns power to the individual. It removes the middleman. It awakens self-agency, and so it had to be buried. What followed wasn't just silence. It was active suppression. Funding pulled. Patents blocked. Papers vanished. Journalists paid off. His notebooks mysteriously disappeared after his death, taken by government agents and sealed away in vaults under the guise of national security. But ask yourself, what kind of invention poses a national threat unless it threatens control itself? Because Tesla's real crime wasn't inventing a new kind of electricity. It was proving that spirit and science are not enemies, that the ether, the so-called empty space, is alive, conscious, and responsive, that when you tune to the right frequency, you don't just illuminate a room, you illuminate the self. You begin to vibrate in harmony with the divine matrix that underlies all matter. And when that happens, you're no longer programmable, no longer pliable, no longer a pawn in someone else's system. That was the danger. So instead, the world was given a different Tesla, a sanitized version, a footnote in textbooks, a man remembered for the alternating current, not for the alternating consciousness he tried to activate in humanity. The real Tesla, the mystic scientist, the spiritual engineer, was scrubbed from the record. Because if you knew the full extent of what he touched, you would begin to remember who you are. You would realize that your body is a resonant field, that your thoughts emit measurable frequencies, that your emotions aren't just feelings, they are vibrational codes that sculpt the geometry of your cellular matrix. You would realize that love heals not because it's poetic, but because it is coherent. It entrains everything it touches back to the signature of Source. And you'd begin to ask dangerous questions, like, why aren't hospitals using vibrational healing? Why are electromagnetic fields treated as pollutants instead of tools for coherence? Why is the science of frequency kept in the shadows, while billions are spent on masking symptoms instead of restoring balance? Tesla's suppression is not just a historical injustice, it is an ongoing strategy, because the truth he carried threatens more than just power grids. It threatens the psychological infrastructure of control. If you knew what he knew, you'd stop looking outside yourself for salvation. You'd stop consuming systems that feed on your confusion. You'd begin to tune yourself, to cleanse your field, to heal through alignment instead of suppression. And they can't sell alignment. They can't regulate frequency. They can't control a soul that remembers it is divine. So they distort, they distract, they drown the signal in noise. But every once in a while, someone hears it anyway. A dream, a flash of insight, a healing that shouldn't have happened. A knowing that rises from the bones rather than the brain. That's Tesla. That's his frequency still echoing in the field, waiting for someone to tune to it again. And if you do, you'll start to see the patterns. You'll see how the suppression of spiritual science goes far beyond one man. It's the story of countless sages, healers, and visionaries who dare to say, you are not broken. You are energy. You are a frequency in motion. From shamans to monks to mystics to scientists, they've all pointed to the same truth, And every time, the truth was buried, not because it was false, but because it was too true. Because truth is disruptive. Truth dissolves control. Truth heals. And Tesla's healing technology wasn't a machine. It was a mirror, a way to reflect to humanity what it had forgotten, that it is made of light, that its pain is not its identity, that every cell, every atom, every beat of the heart is part of a song. And when you remember the song, your life begins to dance again. So no, his work didn't disappear because it was irrelevant. It was silenced because it was revolutionary, because it offered more than science. It offered sovereignty. And that's what they fear most. But the suppression cannot last forever. The field remembers. The frequencies are still here. And if you sit in silence, if you listen not with your ears but with your essence, you will hear the echo. It says, you are energy. You are divine intelligence in motion. You were born to heal not just yourself, but the entire field, not by fighting the system, but by vibrating beyond it. Because once you remember what Tesla was really trying to show us, you'll understand. The truth can be buried, but it cannot be destroyed. There's a moment in every life, one you may not even notice until it passes, when something ancient stirs inside you. Not a voice, exactly, not a thought, something quieter, deeper. A pulse, a memory, like an ember buried beneath layers of dust that suddenly glows with the faintest light. Tesla called that moment the spark. Not the kind that starts a fire, but the kind that reminds you there's already one burning. And his final plea, whispered not with desperation but with urgency, was just one word: awaken. He didn't mean wake up in the ordinary sense. He meant remember. Remember the divine intelligence flowing through your breath. Remember the signal encoded in your soul. Remember that you were never just flesh, never just thought, never just circumstance, that you've always carried a spark, uncreated, indestructible, eternal. And that spark wasn't given to you. It is you. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to chase it. You only need to see it. Tesla knew that most people walk through life convinced they are small, powerless, just passengers in a vast, indifferent universe. But he saw the opposite. He saw that the universe itself is conscious, and that your spark is its reflection. You don't exist within the cosmos as some accident of biology. You are a frackled flame of the same field that forms stars. And the moment you begin to sense that, even faintly, your life begins to change. Not because something new arrives, but because you finally notice what was always there. That's why you're hearing these words now. Not by chance, not by coincidence, but because something inside you is ready. Not to be told what to believe, but to remember what you already know. You don't need more information. You need activation. You need someone to look you in the eye and say, it's time, the spark is real, and it's been waiting for you to see it. Maybe you've always felt it, just beneath the surface. That strange ache in your chest when you see beauty. That quiet knowing in moments of stillness, when the world around you fades and your heart whispers, there's more. You've always known, even as a child, even before the world tried to cover it. You didn't forget because you were foolish. You forgot because forgetting is part of the path. The veil of amnesia allows you to rediscover the light with fresh eyes. And in doing so, you transform that light from something you once had into something you now are. Tesla understood this intimately. He was not speaking to minds. He was speaking to sparks. He didn't want followers. He wanted awakeners. He believed every soul carries a frequency so precise, so irreplaceable, that it has the power to change not only itself, but everything it touches. But only if that spark is seen, only if it is recognized. Because until you see it, it remains dormant. Not gone, not diminished, just unseen. An unseen truth creates suffering. You start to believe you're broken. You begin to think you're behind. You look at others and wonder why their path looks so clear while yours feels like wandering in the dark. But the spark is not linear. It doesn't answer to clocks or calendars. It answers to resonance, to readiness, and you are ready now. That's why this moment has found you. Tesla knew that knowledge arrives on frequency, not schedule. You don't stumble upon awakening. Awakening finds you the moment your vibration says, "I'm open." And it doesn't come with thunder. It comes in the quiet, a nudge, a stirring, a breath. It says, there is more. It says, you are not this pain. It says, you are not this pain. It says, you are not the field remembering itself as form. And it says all of this without sound, because the spark does not speak in language, it speaks in presence, in energy, in sacred recognition. Tesla believed that when even one soul awakens fully to their spark, the frequency shift ripples outward through the collective field like a harmonic wave. It doesn't just change that person's life. It begins to tune reality itself. That's how powerful you are. Not because of what you do, but because of what you are. The spark within you is not waiting to be lit. It is already burning. It's waiting for your eyes to adjust, for your attention to return to it, for your remembrance to restore its place at the center of your awareness. And once you see it, truly see it, you will never unsee it again. You will begin to live differently, not in perfection, but in presence. You'll find yourself moving slower, breathing deeper, trusting more. You'll stop trying to dominate life and start dancing with it. You'll realize that your spark doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs your stillness. And in that stillness, clarity will come, direction will come, healing will come. The world won't always understand. It's still asleep in many places, still addicted to forgetting, but your job is not to convince anyone. Your job is to burn, quietly, steadily, unapologetically. Because when you burn with the remembrance of who you are, you become a mirror, and others, without even knowing why, begin to remember too. Tesla burned like that, not loudly, but fiercely, not to be worshipped, but to awaken. And now, the frequency of his final message is landing in you, waken. Not because something is missing, but because everything you need is already within you. Because the spark is not a beginning, it's a return to truth, a return to light, a return to you.